Always learning and growing. Attracting the right people and keeping your vision in focus every day. This is the Brian Covey Show.
Welcome back, guys. Excited for another episode of the Brian Covey Show. So I just want to thank you guys for everybody that's liked, subscribed, left comments. Part of what we're going to talk about today and my guest actually came through a mutual connection. And that's usually how we learn and grow the best. And so I'm excited about today. We've actually been on some of the same shows together. So I was preparing for Nick Bradley, who's on. Many of you have seen his bio. We're going to dive in his ultra marathons, how he's actually gotten a top ranked #1 in the UK for business podcast in a little bit over a year, which is incredible. So some of you that are in that space, you're going to love it today. He's done some ultra marathons, which, you know, my background of doing sports for so long and having that competitive spirit and drive. How do we take that and convert it over and actually build a business, build a brand? We're going to be touching on a lot of that today. And even as we were preparing, we talked about things relative that are new, like Clubhouse. And so there's going to be a lot of things that we go in today. Nick is somebody I've been following along. I'm excited to learn from him today because some of the shows he's been on with Anthony Trucks and Steve Sims, you guys know that have been on here, great people. And that's what we're doing here on our show, is bringing great people together, sharing not just inspiration, motivation, those things we can find online, but let's get into some of the tactical pieces that you can help wherever you are today. Make sure you're living your best life. So Nick, welcome, my friend. I'm excited for today.
Hey, Brian, that's an intro, man. I love that. I mean, I was looking forward to this. You know, it's when I was doing a little bit of research on you and kind of your mission and what you do and all that sort of stuff. Absolutely delighted to be here. And you know what, we can take the conversation wherever you want to take it. Absolutely fine.
So I'd love to start here because, you know, I played, you know, this high level college and professional soccer, and I know the discipline, I know the hard work, I know how hard it is. And I look and you do these ultra marathons, which I've only got a couple friends that have ever even attempted and done these. The mindset, the just putting the miles in and the time, I would love to start there because I think it all starts with our mentality that then can carry over to success. So one, like, how did you get in and decide you were going to do this, and really the why of what you did? And I'd love to unpack what some of that looked like for you as you were going through it, because that is not easy. It is something most people will never do in their life.
Yeah. Okay. Let's start there. So, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different reasons why I got into it. One of them's more emotive, and the other one's more practical. But I'll share both. So, when I was young, growing up, I was incredibly overweight, like for my age. So, when I was about 10 or 11 years of age, I was effectively double the weight that I am now. Right. So, you know, it's I'm about 70. I know in kilos, it probably isn't going to help the audience, but 75 kilos now. I was like 130 or 140 kilos as a 10-year-old. Right. Wow. And yeah, it was full on. Right. And I got bullied. I remember I used to lock myself in the toilet cubicles at school at both recess time and lunchtime. This was back in Australia where I grew up, because just being on the play yard, so to speak, it was just terrible. Right. I was just getting abused all the time. But I'm a big believer that kind of anything that happens to you in life serves you if you kind of look at it in the right way, right? And we'll get into that in terms of mindset. And the other thing that happened around that time is my father wasn't around. He left when I was younger. So the male influence in my life was my grandfather. And around that age, he had a really bad heart attack. So he was in his early 40s and he had to have what is called a double bypass operation. And he had that. And then, because he was a really gritty guy, right? Just generally really hard-nosed guy. He decided to run a marathon after having open heart surgery.
Wow.
And yeah, I know. And he was the first Australian, I believe this is true, to run a marathon after that. So he got a heap of press and publicity back then. And as I said, I was 10 years of age. So this was like 1984. And I can still remember him coming. He did it in like 4 hours and 3 minutes, right? Which is a good time for anybody, but after having your heart operated on. And I just kind of learned a lot from his resilience and his grit. And as a result of that, I lost all the weight. Didn't really have much help other than just my own determination to do so. Became an athlete in that sense as well for my school and for my state. And I just learned this ability to transform situations if you really want to do it, badly enough, inspired by him and also because of my personal pain that was going through. So that grit was kind of, I suppose, the point I'm making, inbuilt into me through that really sort of formative years when I was younger. And then I just kind of became a freak around exercise. My first business that I started when I was 19 was a gym business. It was a personal training studio. This is like early 90s when personal training wasn't really a thing. Scaled that up, sold that when I was 22. And then I was the fitness writer for Men's Health magazine for a number of years in Australia. And I just kind of got into running. But here's the funny thing. I sort of thought, well, because I had to dig deep to transform myself when I was younger, I realized that by working yourself to a point where it's extreme, putting yourself in very challenging situations and overcoming them was a bit like just working a muscle in a gym anyway. The more you do that, the more you get stronger. And that belief or that system or whatever you want to call it is something which I've taken both into my personal and my business life. And the reason I run these things, or the reason I have run, I think it's 67 marathons and 20-something ultra marathons, I've lost count, is because it sets my mindset up for any challenge that I need to face or overcome. And you learn so much of yourself in those situations that any challenge that hits you outside of those situations, dare I say, it becomes easier to navigate. And I found that to be true across multiple things that I've done since.
Wow. As you're sharing that, and I don't share this story as often, but you were taking me back to around 12 was when I had a similar experience of highly overweight, cholesterol was through the roof. And actually my pediatrician and doctor at the time was also our basketball coach, and I was playing soccer and basketball.
Yeah.
I remember him telling me just, at that age, I was pushing 200 pounds, and he's like, you got to do something. You were not on a good trajectory, and we had high blood pressure in the family and all that. And it was literally one of those breakthrough moments where it was like, I was getting up in the morning at 5 o'clock. I was watching what I was eating. I was learning. Like you said, you have to go all in on it. I remember people saying, what in the world? And I end up losing 50, 60 pounds or whatever. But today people see you, right? And they go, wow, this guy's just running, Nick's just running ultra marathons. It's easy for him. This has just always been easy. That's not true. We've all had
no, no, but to jump in on it, right? And the point I suppose to underline here is you can do anything, right? You can achieve anything if you have the motivation to do so. And the motivation isn't like rah, this, whatever. The motivation for me was pain, right? And I just had a day where I said enough was enough, right? Enough was enough. And I didn't then have coaches around me or mentors. You could argue my grandfather was mentoring me just by his actions, right? Showing me what was possible. So that's a huge part of the story. But I just got disciplined. And that discipline that I learned from, let's say, 10, 11 years of age, all the way up to when I started my first business, because I did a lot of other things athletically after that. Yeah. That discipline is something that I've had with me now for 25 years in business.
See, I love that, because now that we've got 3 kids, and as we're passing that lesson on, is whether people do ultra marathons, play professional sports, whatever, the team sports and that commitment along the way to improving yourself and showing up every day, it shows back up later in life and business, right? Because the same people I notice maybe didn't make it through, or they have that tendency to quit early. They never see things through, where people like yourself, like it is really one of those, you had to have a breakthrough to get to the other side of it, which I love and kind of inspires. What do you think about how that now in business, because you've got tremendously successful resume, you're doing a lot of different things. I'd love to tie that into the podcast piece, because I think I can kind of gather you're a little bit competitive, right? I mean, you're challenging yourself. So number 1, podcast, short period of time. I'm sure some of the listeners would love to hear, like, how did you do that in such a short period of time? And were there lessons that you learned as you went through that?
Yeah. So I like to be really real, right? And I'm gonna tell you how I got to that position and kind of what happened before we got to that. So yeah, I'm massively competitive. I'm not necessarily competitive that I have to, let's say you and I are competing, like, in a race or something. I'd like to compete with you just for the fun of it, but I also acknowledge great performance. I'm ultra competitive with myself. And, it's an overused saying, but I genuinely am trying to become the best version of me. And I'm genuinely trying to help other people achieve that in themselves where I can. Be that by inspiring them, or be that by helping them, whatever that looks like. Just because I think that whole idea about, personal growth it's a never ending thing. It's the journey. And once you start to kind of realize and appreciate that journey, you just get so much kind of confidence, self-belief, fulfillment from it. Right. So that's the context as to why. But the podcast is an interesting one. So I started the podcast because I did a really big deal in the world of private equity. So I was the chief exec of a division, if you like, of a business that we sold to Blackstone Private Equity for $2.3 billion in 2017. And so I was brought in to effectively fix up a failing part of that business. And what was happening is that that environment, if you've ever watched Wall Street, with Gordon Gekko, or Billions, I love Billions. So it can be quite a toxic environment. It's not like terrible, but everything is focused on return, money, wealth, which is cool. But if you live in that world for too long, you can get consumed by it. So I had this incident, and I'm going to give you this quickly because it does lead into the next bit. Is I went to sleep one night when we were closing this deal. My father, who I mentioned left when I was 2, had come back into my life at this stage, and he was only around for a few years, and then he got cancer and died very quickly. And all of this hit at this point in time where I went to bed one night, and I effectively woke up at 3 a.m, and I thought I'd either fallen out of bed or I'd been bitten by something like a spider, or I don't know what it was, but it was a huge amount of pain. And I went to the bathroom, and this whole side of my jaw was just swollen, right? And effectively what had happened, I had all these, my teeth had been shattered. Like I effectively cracked the teeth in the right side of my jaw through my sleep. So it was like being smashed in the face, Brian. It was crazy. I don't remember it happening. I just remember waking up in pain. And obviously I took some medication. I went to the doctor in the morning, didn't get any more sleep that night. Ended up going to the dentist, and the dentist said, I've only seen this beforehand when people are in high stress situations, and you've effectively just literally broken your teeth from clenching. Gosh. So here's the story, right? Leading up to that, with everything going on with my dad and these deals and that environment, I'd made a lot of money, right? So that was all cool, but I wasn't fulfilled. So I thought, I've got to get out of this. So I called up a friend of mine who literally retired in his 20s, and he was always a bit weird at university. He never came out drinking with us. He was never playing pool in the pool halls. He was just kind of like not even studying, but he just was a bit different. Yeah. And as I said, he retired, made a lot of money, about 60 million he made when he was 26. And he said to me, you've got to change your environment. You've got to get out of this toxic world. So I ended up going to a Tony Robbins event, of all places.
Yeah.
And I spent 4 days at this thing called Unleash the Power Within in Chicago. This was 3 weeks after the teeth incident. And I made the decision there, the last day in Chicago. I was actually at the United Center, the house that Jordan built, which was, because I'm a basketball freak. So it was kind of weirdly serendipitous. And I just said, that's it, I'll change everything. So I came back. I thought, I'm not going to quit my, 6-7 figure year job with a private equity firm straight away. But what I am going to do is I'm going to build the machine that's going to allow me to do so. And one of those things was the podcast.
So cool how you branched off. And I've been following along with that. And it seems like, to me, it's just a natural progression of who you are and your brand. And what's cool is that's how some of us connect these days. And especially being, a little bit where we're not traveling, not the normal speaker circuits or just interacting. That's the way we connected. And actually listening to one of your shows, there was a conversation. I'd love for you to unpack this, is the difference between good and great. And you've talked about some of that. And I think there's some people, at least my observation, they're just kind of coasting along, and it's good, but it's maybe not great. And I've seen you take some of those risks, like even stepping out and doing that. And you're talking about, okay, I need to leave this environment. This isn't totally healthy for me. What do you think some of those things are between the differences there of good and great that you've seen?
Well, the problem with good, right? The problem with the good is good doesn't really mean good, right? Good kind of means mediocre, right? If you're good enough, it's not really good enough. Yeah. So, and I learned this a little bit by some Jim Rohn stuff and some Tony Robbins stuff, but the magic happens when you get to great and outstanding, right? So most people live their life in this state of good, which means they're treading this line of mediocrity, which means it's not really painful enough for them to do anything, or it's not really pleasurable enough for them to do anything. So they live in this state. Now, the real tragedy, if you want to call it, of that is some people will do that for 20 or 30 years.
Wow, yeah.
Right. And then they look back, and this was the epiphany for me, which kind of comes back to what I did, is I was successful from the outside, certainly from a monetary perspective or from an achievement perspective. I was CEO, I had all these high jobs, lots of profile, but I wasn't fulfilled. And so for me to be fulfilled, to go to your point around what does great really mean? Well, great or outstanding means that you have some level of cognizance. I wouldn't call it balance, but you actually have a lot of things working in your favor. And the thing that was a deficit for me was I wasn't helping enough people in the world get to where they could get to. And so the podcast, to come back to that, is I put the podcast out there, not to build a business off the back of it, which I have now done, but I put it out there because it was partly about a cathartic way for me to tell my story, to help me, almost like therapy. The second reason I did it is I had a huge deficit in contribution. So I thought, how can I package everything up and put it out there? And I don't know, podcasting just came to me. I just thought that's the vehicle. And then I just went and did it.
And I love that because it is staying in your lane when you think about, and every really successful person I've ever spent time with, mentors or people we've had on the show, there has been that drive that they want to contribute more and this collective impact that they recognize you've had success, right? And we all recognize, like, whether you're making 7 figures or 8 figures, at some point it's a lot of money, right? And there's a lot of things you can do, but that drive inside of you has to be fulfilled. It has to be fed in a way. It's an urge that you did that. For people out there maybe listening and you're driven and you've kind of got this mindset, you're there. Take yourself back to before that a little bit, or people that you've coached and worked with. What are maybe some of those roadblocks stopping them from moving forward? Because we see it, right? They hang out, in your point, they hang out in the good, mediocre comfort zone, I like to call it. It's comfortable there, right? Like, no one's bothering me. Nobody's pushing me. Life's okay. Life's good. How do they move forward?
You've got to, this is my honest belief with it. You first have to recognize that that's not where you want to be. And that's probably the hardest first realization in terms of self-awareness, or situational awareness is probably another way of saying it. And then it's about understanding that you are then going to work out how you're going to change it. And that's something where, for me, I've had mentors and coaches, as I'm sure you have, people who have helped me see the path of what I need to do to change the situation. So I'm still a big believer in that, in that way of doing things. But if someone doesn't firstly recognize that they want to change, if it's not important enough, then nothing's going to happen, right? Because they're just not going to do anything about it. If someone realizes that they want to change and they're absolutely had enough of it, and they're open-minded as to what they need to do, because it could be a lot of things that they have to do that are going to be very uncomfortable.
Yes. But
they're determined that they will do whatever it takes. They're the people who make that transition, in my opinion.
Yeah, and think back to both of our stories. When you think back to young kids, adolescents, and all that, and being overweight, it's like, until it's brought to your attention, it's like, hey, this really isn't going to work for you. Like, this isn't a good life plan here. And it's like that moment where it's almost you've had some type of tragedy happen, flips the light bulb on for many of us. And I see that moving forward. And I love how you've taken that now and you're spreading your message into podcasting. And then even today, we were talking a little bit. I love to talk about this whole new app that everybody's so excited about, the invite only, the newest shiny object that has flown in front of us. I'd love your take on Clubhouse, because you were talking about before we came on, you had a great room, what your intention was as you went in. I think we've all kind of seen there are some people on there, just like on every social media platform and in life, there are people that fake it, and they believe in the fake it till you make it strategy, which I completely disagree with. And there are people out there that are really doing it, and they have actual advice. And here's step 1. And also, hey, by the way, here's step 2, step 3, step 4. Like, we actually have a concise process. What are your thoughts so far on Clubhouse and just how people can make an impact like yourself? And then I'd also love the second audience, which is people that are just looking for help, right? Like, they're the ones out there like, please come help me. How would you approach that app from those two different perspectives?
Yeah, I mean, I've been on there now for 2 weeks, and as we were saying before we started recording today, or speaking, that I've got about 9,000, 10,000 followers now, and this is the thing about it, right? Is I'm still learning it, so I'm no expert, but I can tell you my experience of what I've had there in those 2 weeks. So a lot of people are there exactly as you said, and this is again my opinion. There's no necessarily evidence or fact of this, but you can just get a sense when people are speaking about how real it is. There are a lot of people there who are doing the whole "I'm going to sell you snake oil" stuff, hidden in the kind of facade of, hey, yeah, it's altruistic, I'm here to help you, whatever else. I'm really transparent, right? I am giving up my time because I see value in building my personal brand and building my influence and building my authority. I also believe the famous Zig Ziglar quote that if you help enough people get what they want in life, you'll have everything you want and need in life. So that's one of my probably most famous favorite beliefs, right, in anything. But I'm not spending 10 hours a day or whatever it is on that stage just for the goodness of my heart. Off the back of that, and I'm very open about this. I don't believe it's anything other. I invite people if they want me to help them in the various companies. I've got 7 separate businesses, right? Yeah. If people want me to help them, I can help them, right? Get in touch. I will never ever sell anything in terms of that. I'll invite people to participate if they want to. I'll be very, very open about that. But we had over the weekend, and I was on a couple of the big stages with Grant Cardone and John Lee Dumas and a few others. We had 665 inbound leads. Wow. Yeah, I know. My Instagram direct messaging thing just went through the roof. All I did was stay on stage and answer questions around business scale up, acquisitions, all the stuff I do. So I did that. So I did put the time in, but I was also very transparent that if you want additional help with that, there's a business model behind this. Yeah. Whereas some people are kind of hiding the fact that they're not doing that. And I just think, people aren't stupid, So that's the first answer to the first part of your question, I think, is, be aware of what you're going into there, but understand that if you have a business, it's a great channel to be able to get your message across. And the stage that I ran just before coming on this show, I expected it to be about 50 people. It was about how you can buy and sell businesses for a living. So how do you do acquisitions using other people's money, all that sort of thing. Yeah. We have different ways of helping people do that, be that programs, mentoring, all sorts of different stuff within my businesses. So, that was what we were doing it for. That said, we were also prepared to sit up there and not hide anything. So if you wanted to know how to do it, I'll tell you exactly how to do it. And that's your choice whether you need additional help. That room blew up to close, I think it was about 300. I looked, the last I saw was 287. That's awesome. And then we had 91 messages in my Instagram message box for that 2-hour session. So I just give you that from some data. So it's interesting, isn't it? I mean,
you hit something really important though. Is like none of us are there is no master out there. The data is not yet released. We don't know the trends. We don't know what's happening offline. My only, just kind of like you shared, is your experience. I think our experiences matter. And I have been able to build relationships offline and then on Instagram, and then actually set up actual appointments with people, maybe for the podcast show, right? Or we did one the other day that was real estate and mortgage coaching, much in my lane. And some real estate agents had questions about financing. Great. I'm somebody that can absolutely be an expert and guide you through all of that. And it was just cool, the relationships. I'll be interested to see who's camping out there and who's really spending time, 6 months, a year from now, and what it grows to. And if nothing else, there's this human desire I'm seeing being portrayed there, that people still are desiring connection. And that platform has done one thing I think really well, taking the video off for many people that are uncomfortable going on camera.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I think what they've done is remove the friction of that. So, if you don't want to, have a shower and a shave or whatever it ends up you doing, you can kind of you can log in. The other thing I'll say just quickly, the other 2 things that I found really valuable for me is I have made some personal connections, as in friendships, which is awesome. And I've also had a couple of other business relationships that have developed as well.
Still. Oh, we're back.
It cut out there for a second, Brian. I was still talking, but did I cut out, or was that just you?
It did. I think it did the lovely technology. Let's pause them. This is really good. We want to rewind. It's so good.
I hope my mouth was probably like. Oh, that. I said two things. I said there's two other things that I found very valuable for people who are listening. One is I've made some really good friendships in 2 weeks, like just great, like people that I now, speak to daily. And there's a couple of business collaborations, partnerships that have come off the platform as well, which just looks super exciting. So yeah, if people aren't on it yet, depending on what you're trying to achieve, I definitely think it's something worth exploring.
I do too. Those connections that now we're taking offline are phenomenal. And if you're someone that really believes in going deeper and you're not transactionally minded, I can see that as you will build relationships for people that I was just kind of watching this play out as people that don't want to be on video and are not as comfortable. They are okay joining a room audio only, and we'll share. I think that's going to be key. So I'd love to unpack this. So something as I was prepping for this, you share this piece about 6 actual key areas that businesses must master for exponential growth. And one of our core values is growth. One of my words I wrote down for this year was expansion in all areas: faith, family, fitness, finance, just everywhere. Walk people through that, because I found that to be interesting, what those 6 steps were. And I think everybody at some level wants to expand. I think it's a year people can expand like never before. I really believe that. Resources are available, time is available. So how do they do that? What are those 6 key areas that you found there for the growth?
Yeah, so I'll talk about it in 2 different ways, if that's okay, because I think it helps. So I've got a mantra for life, right, which is more about, as to use your word, an expansive mindset versus a scarcity mindset. And there are 4 things that I say to myself daily, be that through sort of affirmations or whatever else. And I say at the end of every podcast episode as well, which is be grateful, be brave, have faith, show up. And to unpack that a little bit, these are my beliefs, but I think it's interesting just in terms of how I got to them. But, this idea of, being grateful, I believe that's the antidote of fear. I don't think you can really manage fear and kind of get rid of it or eradicate it. You just have to master how you respond to it. And so often for me, this idea of feeling grateful for what I have right now centers me so that I'm not getting too far ahead of myself. And then the be brave is stepping into that fear, realizing that, you have to do that. If you are going to grow, there's no way you're going to grow without stepping into fear, right? You've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. That's right. And then, in terms of having faith, that's not so much of any sort of religious connotation. It's more about trusting yourself. Trusting yourself that if you are doing the things that you need to do, that the ultimate outcome is going to come at some point. It may not be exactly when you want it. It may not be exactly what you want it to be, but it's going to be something that is great on the basis that you are doing what's required. And then the last one is really about the actual doing the work, showing up. How you show up is just so important. And, that old saying about, how you do anything is how you do everything. So I have those as kind of, let's call them 4 building blocks of how I want to perform. And then what you were referring to was more on the business side about how do you create a really valuable business, right? And that was what we call the 6 peaks of value. And that comes from years of working in private equity, being the turnaround guy, going in there and fixing up the problems. And there's nothing, again, rocket science about these things. I'll go through them very, very quickly. But every outstanding business, every great outstanding business has these characteristics optimized. So the first one is you've got to have a clear purpose as to why you're doing what you're doing. So that's a couple of things. It's firstly knowing where you are today and knowing where you want to get to, that vision piece, but really understanding why it matters. And a lot of people I work with, if they don't understand why they're doing what they're doing, and a lot of businesses, when they go from startup to scale up, they forget for various reasons. Anything else I'm going to say now, the other 5 points, it doesn't really matter, right? You've got to start there. Second one is profit, but profit in terms of you've got to have a runway and an ideology around creating value from profit, because back to scarcity and expansiveness, if you're running on vapor and you don't have a business that's generating value from a profit perspective, you're always going to be worrying about whether the business can survive, right? So it's a very practical thing, but I always say you've got to have reserves of cash, because that's going to take you to the most resourceful state. It's not really about what you spend the money on. It's about making sure that you're not getting yourself into a scarcity mindset, right? Wow. Then the third one is proposition. So do you have a product or a service which is remarkable? It solves a very clearly identified problem for a very crisp audience. So don't be all things to all people, right? Be important to the few, right? Because that actually is how you grow. The fourth area is predictability. So that's having a predictable flow of the right customers coming into your business, driving recurring revenue. And that one is so critical for private equity. because the predictability of revenue, contract, subscription models, all of that stuff's critical. That's how you attribute value, because it takes away risk. Yeah. And then the last two is process. The ability to scale is the ability to work with structure. And lots of entrepreneurs, particularly the creative ones, hate this. I don't want to do this. But you know what? You are not going to scale unless you can bring systems into your business. And then the last one, arguably the most important one, up there with the first one, is people. It's not just the capability, it's the culture, the values, the behaviors that you build around your entity. And my advice to people, it doesn't matter if you've got 5 people, 50 people, 500, 50,000, you've got to start early. You've got to align the values early, because that's going to be the benchmark, if you like, of how everything gets done. So hopefully that helps, but that's how I look at it. And I analyze businesses through those 6 lenses. And if they're all optimized, that's when you're absolutely on that path to transformative growth.
And that's huge, because I think people can listen to that. They can go back to it. And it's almost like you said, a self-audit of where are we performing? Where are we not performing? In those 6 key areas, as I was kind of prepping for this, I was like, wow, how are we doing? I love what you said about, the bookends I like to speak of, the purpose and the people. If you get those wrong, you're right. Everything else in the middle, it really doesn't matter. You can have the best systems and processes and such and all. But I love that, because I think that can also correlate over to people that are starting to build their brands or start to get into this entrepreneurial world. They start to realize it's not just about them anymore. And it's their first time to go, I'm scaling a team, I'm building this out, and people matter so much. So I like asking this question to people, and you've got the experience to have seen this. If you had a legacy and you were going to share one truth with people, and it was kind of that last truth you could leave them with, and it's a lesson to be true in your life, but you think could impact them, what would be one of those life lessons that you would share with people that you think, help them, and would be a truth that would help them reach that next level of success for themselves?
Yeah. Okay. So this is one that, again, it's a personal one to me, and I'll reflect a little bit back on what we've spoken about for the last, half an hour or so. If you feel that you are not on the path that you want to be on, right? So, and this normally starts with a little niggle, right? It starts with a little itch that you're thinking, this doesn't feel right. And it could be something really small. It could be that, I'm going to work every day, for example, and I'm just not feeling this. Yeah. What most people are going to do, right? Are they going to they're not going to address it. Right. And then they're going to end up 60, 70 years of age and possibly hit the worst thing in the world. The worst thing in the world is regret, right? Yes. Fear is nothing. Regret is the worst thing. You don't want to be there. So my advice is this: as soon as you feel that, and you might be feeling it now as you're listening to me talk, you've got to scratch it, right? You've got to go out there and you've got to nudge it. You've got to go and explore it, whatever that means. Because the whole thing about joy, I think, and being happy and being fulfilled and having achievement is really following your purpose and mission, right? Working out what that is, and then absolutely having, as I said beforehand, the being brave enough to do it. Yes. And I think if you do that, you're never going to fail. You may not have the clear journey of success. It might not be linear. It might be this kind of erratic thing, but you know what? You're going to fail. And so my message is this, follow that. And then I think you will truly find, happiness in your life, and you'll be an inspiration for others, and everything sits on the other side of that, in my opinion.
Wow. And I love that. That's why I knew today would be special. And I knew, I talk about transferring of energy and being on the same frequency. I knew this would be a great conversation, and I would personally learn, which I always look for guests like yourself, like, who can I learn, be inspired by, but also leave and go, okay, there's some substance to this that I can go apply this. There's areas that I can improve. And Nick, I can't thank you enough. It's been incredible. I know everybody's going to want to follow along and find you. So where's the best spots that they can find you on social to follow along in your journey or to learn more about what we've shared today?
Yeah, sure. Well, before I say that, just a sort of a shout out to you, Brian. Your questions are excellent. I love coming on shows where, people are really well prepared and they've thought this through, and there's an intuitiveness to the way that you ask questions, which I just want to acknowledge, because it's fantastic to sort of be on the other side of that. So thank you for that. Yeah, in terms of me, podcasts, again, the interesting thing, we didn't probably finish this, and I'll just do it very quickly. The reason the podcast has been successful is because it's raw. It's a story of lots of different things. And the reason people like it is because it's never edited. It's everything, right? It's my whole thing. So if you just want to learn a little bit around the perspectives of mindset and any of the things we've talked about, even the practicalities of business, because we do get technical, have a listen to it, right? I put it out there to help people. So there's that. I hang out a lot on Instagram and LinkedIn, so people can find me there. I'm at Nick C. Bradley on Instagram, so you can definitely kind of give me a follow there, and I'll get back to people. And then, our website is SUYB, scale up your business, SUYB.global. But I always get back to people. I'm not always the best in terms of pace. I'm disciplined, but I always like to, because I never take the role that I have or the position that I have for granted. So just want to say that.
That's awesome. And we will include all that in the show notes. So if you missed it, didn't have a pen and paper, we will include that in there. This has been incredible. And Nick, I just got to thank you again, because these are the type of conversations I think we need to get more of these out there and make that collective impact. And so this is what the show was designed for. This is why I launched the podcast over a year ago. And this is why we continue to look for great guests like Nick. So if you'll help us like, subscribe, follow along, leave comments, let me know other guests that you have found out there. You say, hey, Brian, this is a great person for our community. Let's bring them in. Let's have them share. That's what it's all about. And I'm super excited to tell you guys, we're in the final stage of the book, Conversations with Covey, coming out in February, doing the last edits and working through. So that's going to be taking some of the best podcast episodes of season 1 and sharing some of their stories. I can't wait to share it. This is all about helping you learn and grow. I selfishly get to learn and grow every time I have a great guest on like Nick. So thank you guys for tuning in, and I hope you have an incredible day. We'll catch you on the next episode. See ya.